By a show of hands, how many of you would consider yourself to be a liar? Okay, so it's mostly everybody, so you're honest about lying, except Brittany, who is lying about being a liar. That's okay. Writing things down. So in my magic job, I study lies. I even do a routine called the human lie detector test. And later in my presentation, I will explain this picture in which I met with a professional examiner to experience the test myself. So people tell about 2 lies a day. So it's important to understand the instrument that is so widely used to measure our devious selves. Today, I want to talk about the arguments for and against the use of polygraph tests. So why are we so fascinated with liars? About 75 years ago, Dean Wigmore wrote, "If ever there is devised a test for the psychological evaluation of witnesses, the law will run to meet it." And that's exactly what it did. Anti-polygraph advocates cite ethical issues, saying it's torture and an invasion of privacy. If you take a polygraph test, it's a nerve-wracking experience. It's intimidating, and some of the methods are coercive. Anti-polygraph advocates cite the Fifth Amendment, saying it's self-incrimination, and a study by Dr. Richard White goes so far as to cite the Eighth Amendment and call it psychologically cruel and unusual punishment. They say strapping people to machines and probing people with questions is wrong. The other side says we need to find liars because it's vital to human progress, and we need to evaluate people in a way that exceeds basic human instinct. In ancient India, for example, if you were thought to be a liar, they would make you hold fire in your hands, and the only way you would be acquitted is if you didn't get burned. The Arabs did something similar with hot rods that they would put on your tongues. So throughout history, we've had this fascination with finding liars. But the polygraph is science. It's currently the best thing we have available to evaluate people without the will of the gods or the flame retardants of your hands. If we ignore it, it's kind of like slapping science in the face. They say it's not self-incrimination because you can't really be forced to take it, and calling it cruel and unusual punishment wouldn't make sense because if you consider a polygraph test to be measuring human responses to a stimulus, you'd also have to call an MRI or an X-ray a violation of human privacy. So I want to look at why the test satisfies or does not satisfy the need for truth. But in order to do that, I need to tell you a little bit about how a polygraph works. A polygraph measures basic physiological responses, like breathing through 2 tubes strapped around your chest, your blood pressure through a blood pressure cuff on your arm, and galvanic skin conductance, which is literally how much you sweat, measured by 2 electrodes they put on your fingertips. And they also sit you in a chair full of motion detectors that measure every one of your movements. There are 3 types of questions they ask on a polygraph test, and they will ask you between only 1 to 4 questions, and you take the same test like 3 times. There are irrelevant questions, such as, Jenna, are you sitting down right now?
Yes.
That is an irrelevant question. There are control questions, or probable lie questions. People will probably lie to, like, Jake, have you ever lied to your parents? You don't have to answer that. But we score the test by comparing those control questions to relevant questions, or what we really want to know, which is, did you kill Colonel Mustard with a candlestick in a ballroom? And you'll have three different results, which are deceptive, non-deceptive, and inconclusive. Critics rate the accuracy of polygraph tests at slightly better than chance, so 50 to 70%. And say that in utilizing countermeasures, there was a study by the Journal of Applied Psychology in 1994 that showed in a lab test that half of the people were able to defeat the polygraph test utilizing countermeasures. Whereas the APA says that the accuracy is more like 89% and 11% is inconclusive, meaning we don't know. So, in the validity of the test, you have false positives, which means that innocent people show up as lying, and this can be attributed to anxiety or flight or flight response, and that occurs in 3 in about 100 tests. You also have a false negative, which is when liars show truthful, which is much rarer, and is about 1 in 100, and I've heard statistics up to 1 in 1,300 tests showed a false negative. The pro-polygraph side says that the anti-polygraph side forges their statistics using questionable statistical measures. So if you were to give 10 tests, for example, and you were right in 7 of them, wrong in 1, and said you didn't know in 2, the American Polygraph Association, which is also the APA, which is kind of weird, says this should be 7 out of 8. That's 87.5% accuracy. Whereas critics say this should be 7 out of 10, and that's 70% accuracy. So inconclusives are not necessarily wrong. And the FBI actually trains their agents to beat polygraph tests by not actually beating them, but by not cooperating with them at all. And you get these inconclusive responses. So mental countermeasures are not productive at all. They actually increase the chance. So you might have heard that sociopaths can be polygraph tests, but it's actually the opposite because they're so bad at regulating emotions. And as far as physical countermeasures, like the famous anal sphincter squeeze or stepping on a tack, biting your tongue, the newest technology in polygraph advocates say that you can catch those countermeasures. So what are the consequences if we use polygraph tests? The pro-polygraph side says that it'll cause social disharmony, or the anti-polygraph side says social disharmony, and people are adamant that they be abolished, and definitely should not be admitted in courts of law. Innocent people could go to jail. Regarding sex offenders, Dr. Jeffrey Roski states that there's limited evidence of it serving as a deterrent and calls the practice futile. However, if we consider the test viable, it can be used in a variety of settings. 90% of the polygraph tests given in Colorado are used in the treatment of sex offenders. And I got most of this information from Jason Page, who is a polygraph examiner in Denver and a member of the APA. The recidivism rates, or the rates of repeat offenses in states that do not use polygraph, that just use treatment, are about 30 to 35%, and they get an average disclosure from sex offenders of 2 prior victims. In states that utilize polygraph testing, you get an average disclosure of 19 prior victims, and recidivism rates drop to 2.8%. So they do have a viable use. So I'm sure you guys have burning questions, and I would like to discuss them with you. Is there anybody who has, yes?
How often are polygraph tests used in court cases and stuff?
In Colorado, in particular, you can only use it if both defense and offense, prosecutor and the judge agree, which never happens. They are never used in court cases. They are used in plea bargains a lot, and they're advocated for use in acquittals. Without revealing my side, honestly, I can say that the majority of pro-polygraph advocates and anti-polygraph advocates say, yeah, it shouldn't be used in court for different reasons, but one being that the jury might not understand that a polygraph measures fight or flight response and not necessarily deception. It measures things that are indicative of deception. And for every polygraph test used in court, you would have to have an examiner there and give like a 2-hour class on what the statistics actually mean in order to use it adequately. So another thing that's really interesting to me that I would want your opinion on, because it's something I struggled with when I was doing research, is the aspect of guilty knowledge, or if you're confused while you're taking the test. So if you didn't rob the bank, but your girlfriend robbed the bank, is when you show deceptive on a test, if someone asks you, did you rob the bank, you're going to show bodily responses if you're being deceptive. And that's another reason why court cases are kind of,
Oh no, I was giving you a time thing.
Oh, you're giving me a time thing?
Actually, I have slight statement / question. I actually have a friend of mine, I won't say his name obviously because I'm not allowed to, but he used to be an intelligence officer in the Air Force, and he had to take a polygraph test, and I think that they're given 3 tries, and he failed both times. Not because he was being deceptive, it's just that fight or flight thing. So what happens if somebody fails the polygraph test, say for the sex offenders? Do they do a follow-up, or is that the only test that they get?
If you've been failed, like they are telling the truth, or they're being deceptive and they don't, yeah, okay. So if you fail a polygraph test, you then have to go through an interrogation process. And if you meet certain requirements for, it goes along with your probation, like kind of an agreement, and you'll get more therapy, more treatment. They can take away some of your rights, some of your abilities and things like that. If you continually fail a polygraph test, it's kind of stipulated based on each individual contract that they have. So I want to go back to this picture, which I will tell you that in lab conditions, I stole $5 from a Dixie cup, and I lied about it, and I beat the polygraph test. I lied, and it said I was telling the truth, not deceptive, but I actually beat it. So you may be surprised to learn that I'm an advocate for polygraph tests, and I think they're highly reliable. And the reason for that is my particular experience is a good indicator of why the studies on reliability are so skewed. Because I went in, and I was not going to go to jail if I stole $5. Jason might make fun of me, and that's probably all that would happen. So when they do these lab tests with polygraph exams, they're not super reliable because the people are just split into guilty and not guilty randomly. They don't really have anything at stake. So that kind of skews your statistics. And honestly, I had to train super hard to beat that test for months. Felix and I have been working on this, and even for someone like me who's an expert liar, I suppose, it's nerve-wracking. You sit there and you're like, oh man, oh geez, oh man. So in supporting polygraph tests, you support sexual victims and protect employers who have to hire people in positions of trust, because they're also used in pre-employment screenings. And it'll aid in national security, because these FBI agents can't necessarily beat the polygraph test. We just put out a lot of things saying that we can to scare away people from doing it to us. So you can call me a liar, liar, pants on fire. But I did not lie about anything in this presentation, and I would take a polygraph test to prove it.
All right, so feedback for Chelsea.